to the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. NFL Week 14. Oh, where has the time gone, my friends? I am your host, Todd Furman, joined, as always, by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. But before we get to Payne, I want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, FanDuel.com/BetTheBoard. Use the promo code BetTheBoard. Take advantage of your $1,000 risk-free bet as early as tonight for Steelers, Vikings, and plenty of other enhanced odds options available to you. 30-1 prices throughout the course of the NFL weekend. FanDuel has you covered across the board, whether it's NFL, college football, NBA, NHL, college basketball, you name it. It's all available for you at FanDuel. Use the code BetTheBoard. And Payne,
all is this sports.
All is this sports. No table tennis. I don't think we get that or anything else along those lines. But you'd think at some point in the season I'd be able to get through at least an open without me stumbling. But apparently that's not the case. So why change with tradition this week? Before we get into the games, and we have a busy slate to get into, did want to get your take on what we saw transpire Monday night in the wintry conditions of Western New York, where Bill Belichick did his best homage to the annual Army-Navy game.
It's an interesting game from the standpoint of, I love Bill Belichick, obviously brilliant, but he's getting way too much credit for this game plan. And a lot of people, as we saw the first 48 hours, are bashing Buffalo's defense. And I understand it, right? When you basically have the playbook in your hand, it's like, we're going to run here. We're going to run here. It wasn't the best night. They were bullied from time to time, and obviously the massive explosive to start that game changed things. Right? When an opponent's going to run on 3rd and 5 and they understand that they're going against the wind, that was a give up down, really. And so to turn it into 8 points really set the tone of the evening. But there was things that Buffalo did that weren't very smart. And, you know, a lot of people are bashing them for deferring the toss and not going with the wind in the important second quarter and all-important fourth quarter. I will say, if you did look at the weather reports, wind was going to trickle down in the second half as opposed to the first half. So being able to see the scoreboard or build a lead was huge. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for me. If you look at the advanced box score, Buffalo was a winner. Okay? My struggle there is not understanding that Josh Allen has a monster arm and we can throw a little bit more. And I think that was the interesting part of this game, because if you like New England, it was like, we have an advantage because we can run the ball. Well, you were right. And if you liked Buffalo, it was, Price is good, but we think we have the quarterback that can throw it through the wind. And you were right. Both sides were right. But the problem was just little things drive me nuts, right? And this is kind of like the tactician in me. When I watched that game, anytime Buffalo was going with the wind, specifically early in that game, why don't you use some goddamn tempo? Extend the quarter where you have an advantage. No tempo. I mean, the clock's draining down to 5 seconds. Drove me insane. Josh Allen, I don't believe, had a scripted run all evening. We said that would be an advantage of his. Didn't happen. There is this element of we have to force feed the ball in the ground game. You're moving it on that final drive. Then all of a sudden, 1st and 10, we got to hand it off to Zach Moss, who does nothing with it. It just doesn't make sense. The RPO game worked pretty well. And if you use that RPO game in terms of like, hey, this is going to be a handoff, they're going to have to respect Josh's legs also, but also the middle of the field's wide open. And we know that there's wind and weather, so they're playing their 2 plotting linebackers, New England that is. Anytime you throw over the middle, you're quite successful. I thought the short pass game should have been used a little bit more. And then you have the unfortunate things, right? Everyone will talk about the N'Keal Harry muffed punt as being advantageous to Buffalo, but it was basically a net on the Breida fumble. I believe it was like 1 extra EPA added for the N'Keal Harry fumble compared to the Breida fumble. So basically a wash. Everything else was pretty negative in Buffalo's favor in terms of, missing field goals. You had the 2 late drives, come away with no points there. Frustrating game for Buffalo because it dramatically swings things in terms of getting the number 1 seed in the AFC, because now New England has a 50% chance for that number 1 seed in a bye. Buffalo's odds dwindled down to about 19% there. So massive game on Monday night.
Fortunately for the Bills, if they want to eliminate the bad taste in their mouth, they'll get those very same Patriots, albeit in Foxborough, in a few short weeks. But they have plenty of work to be done sooner than that with a trip down to Florida to take on Tampa, a game we'll get to in greater detail shortly. But no doubt, one of the more intriguing games that we've seen all season. Obviously, weather plays a role. And to your point, talking about tactics, one team felt better equipped to make some of those decisions, but you wonder how different the narrative is around Bill Belichick only electing to throw 3 passes if Josh Allen gets a designed run or two in those last 2 sequences where Buffalo comes away with 0 points to try and get those on the board. So we'll see how
that's the thing that's so crazy, right? Like everyone post game is like, you didn't force New England to throw, right? Because you couldn't stop the run. It's the inverse. If Buffalo's offense got out to a lead and used the wind as their favor and went tempo and built the lead early, you think Mac Jones is only throwing 3 times? No. That's always the key, right? You want to make teams do what they don't want to have to do. And so, sure, Buffalo's run defense could have been a little bit better. They could have been better tackling. They could have chose a path where we said, hey, you need to load the box here, which was smart. But like the run blitzes where guys were losing their gap integrity wasn't overly smart. On 3rd and 5, there's no reason to send a run blitz, right? Like keep everything in front, even if they gain a first down there. You live to fight another day with them running the ball from their own 38 instead on first down. So that was interesting. But if you're able to build a lead offensively, then all of a sudden Mac Jones has to throw. And that becomes a wildly different game in my mind.
Hey, my favorite part of that game wasn't actually what took place on the field. It was watching the Buffalo defenders get all worked up in the post-game press conference when they were asked questions about stopping the run and their inability to do so. So you have to think this group will play with a chip on their shoulder, especially when they see the Patriots in a few short weeks. But either way, New England now a stranglehold as they go into the bye with the outlook atop the AFC East. All right, Payne, you tossed out a question, or I should say our social media team tossed out a question to our loyal listeners, and we're going to tweak the format for the Thursday podcast for the first time in 4 or 5 years. Would you care to inform the listeners what's going to change today?
Nothing. We're just going to talk about Thursday night game first.
Yeah,
that's it. Apparently, the loyal listeners who jump on the podcast early like to listen to it in its entirety, and so they enjoy listening to the Thursday night game first. Obviously, in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty trivial because we timestamp everything, so you're able to bounce around. And our idea initially was, well, the Thursday night game dies the minute it's over, and so people listening on Friday don't have to listen to that at the onset again. But yes, we will go with the majority who voted to put the Thursday night game first. If you were one who voted against that, apologies. We'll go with the majority, and everything is timestamped. So you can move around the podcast quite easily.
It's all there and readily available for you. Of course, we'll talk to John Shearin later in the program as well to get his take not only on Thursday night, but maybe a look ahead to Monday Night Football as well, a marquee showdown between the Arizona Cardinals and Los Angeles Rams. But before we get there, let's head to the Twin Cities, where the Minnesota Vikings will welcome in the Pittsburgh Steelers on Thursday night. Minnesota, a 3-point favorite, lay $1.20 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total on the game sits at 43.5. These two teams, Payne, come into Thursday night on opposite ends of the emotional spectrum. The Steelers, a hard-fought 1-point victory, withstanding a late 2-point conversion attempt from the Baltimore Ravens. Meanwhile, the Minnesota Vikings, still not quite sure what the defensive scheme was with 4 seconds to go, as they'd allow the late touchdown pass to the Detroit Lions. When you look at Big Ben, we know he's flirting with retirement at the end of the season, but still has 5 game-winning drives this year, which is tied for the most in the National Football League, right there alongside Justin Herbert. The Steelers, with Big Ben under center, have been favored in 34 straight starts when facing a team with a losing record, a streak that will come to an end tonight. Meanwhile, when you look at Minnesota on the defensive side, 11 of their 12 games have been decided by 1 possession this season. 9 of 12 games this season have been decided on the final play. I can't remember a team where we've seen, you have to watch them from start to finish. 7 blown leads, 5 opponent game-winning drives, and 101 points allowed after the 2-minute warning in the second quarter, or with less less than 2 minutes remaining in the fourth, not exactly ringing endorsements for that middle eight that we talk about. And the Steelers, this is a team who's been great as an underdog this season, while the Vikings have struggled as a favorite. So many different ways to go in a game like this, Payne. I'm not sure if you wanted to attack the Steelers offense against the Minnesota defense that should be trending up, or if Minnesota has the pieces, albeit limited with weaponry on the offensive side, going against the Steelers defense that I think, despite their performance last weekend, still gets by on reputation more so than actual production in 2021.
Yeah, everything you said was spot on. We'd certainly be feeling a little bit better about the Vikings. Had some positive variance at any point in the season. Peeked its head out. But that just hasn't been the case. Now, we did see some number grabbers get out early, took Pittsburgh +4. I think the thought process there was simple in that the look ahead was basically soft 4.5, and now we've upgraded Pittsburgh, winning as a dog over Baltimore, and downgraded Minnesota a touchdown, or downgraded Minnesota after losing last week as a touchdown favorite. Adam Thielen is obviously out. So basically what we're looking at here is Minnesota roughly, about call it a 3.3 favorite right now. That's probably a good number, right? Like, Minnesota's 1.5 points better than Pittsburgh by our numbers, and then they have one of the best home field advantages in football. So, Monday night, that advantage is probably going to be a touch larger. So I think this is the right number, right? You're either dealing a soft 3.5, or you're dealing, 3 - 20, somewhere in there. Like, schedule makers did not do Pittsburgh any favors here, right? Like, you start to think about this a little bit. It's like they played the late game Sunday instead of a 1 p.m. kick. And it's against their biggest rival in like this physical game. Fortunately, it didn't go to overtime. Now you're basically on the road with 3 days rest. We know Big Ben's dealing with shoulder and elbow issues. Ben claims the shoulder is worse than the elbow, so he doesn't practice Wednesdays at all. And most of the time, he doesn't even throw at Thursday's practice because of those arm issues. Now he's got a game on Thursday. And just looking at some of these numbers, right, it's the first time Ben will play in a short week Thursday game since 2018. And you look at Pittsburgh, and I was listening to Tomlin's interview this week, and he's basically like, we just kind of face the Thursday situation as it comes, and every season it will be different. We don't have an exact plan or blueprint to how we handle Thursday games. We just face what's in front of us. And so Mike Tomlin, in 15 seasons, 2-5 on the road with 3 days of rest. So whatever strategy he's using, probably not the best. All signs point to Patrick Peterson, Eric Kendricks, and Anthony Barr returning for Mike Zimmer's defense. Both starting defensive tackles and Pearson Tomlinson returned last week. So I think there are some good get-backs. Dalvin Cook upgraded right before we started recording this podcast. If you listen to some of the quotes coming out of Matt Canada, he's talked about simplifying and focusing on what the offense does best to prepare for a short week game. And so my guess, at least early on, we're going to see Najee Harris. He did nothing the first 3 quarters against Baltimore, but ended strong. So I would guess they feature him early. They'll look at the film and think Minnesota's soft up front. And yeah, they'd be pretty correct. Right, the Vikings are 29th in defensive rush efficiency, 32nd in EPA per rush allowed, 32nd in run stop win rate. Now, it does improve, right? You get your 2 defensive tackles back, as I mentioned, but I don't necessarily know if Pitt's going to have success running it, and really Pittsburgh's definition of success running is a little bit different than the rest of the league. Like, they're probably pretty happy with 3.5 yards a pop. Quickly flip it to the other side of the ball. I think it comes down to 2 things over there. It's what coverages will Pittsburgh go with, and then pressure. Typically, Pittsburgh plays high rates of man. Kirk Cousins has been one of the best quarterbacks against man this season, but he struggled against zone concepts. Last week, Pittsburgh didn't use as much man, didn't go with as much cover 0. They played a really soft cover 4, and when they blitzed, which they did a bunch, Lamar was blitzed on more than 40% of his dropbacks, Pittsburgh sat an off man. So it's clear Pittsburgh doesn't really feel great playing as much man without Joe Hayden, so we'll see what they go with on a short week here. Probably not a ton of adjustments because it is a short week. Pressure obviously helps with coverage, but even with TJ Watt, whether it's pressure rate or pass rush win rate, the Steelers are about average. And Minnesota has had trouble, obviously, protecting Kirk Cousins for years. So you're looking at a Vikings 27th in pass block win rate. Left tackle Christian Darrisaw looks to be out again. Cousins has handled pressure in the blitz relatively well, 76% adjusted completion percentage against the blitz, 7.9 in attempt, 109 passer rating. But that will be a matchup that I think favors Minnesota a little bit, or Pittsburgh rather, up front. Now, when you look at this, and it's going to sound wild to some, Minnesota's offense is actually the best unit on the field. Top 10 in overall efficiency against an above-average schedule. Pittsburgh, you kind of hinted at. And
don't tell that to Mike Zimmer, Payne. Don't tell that to Mike Zimmer.
Yes. Pittsburgh, we've been kind of ahead of this on the Steelers. Like, they don't have this vaunted defense, right? They're hovering around the bottom 5 in overall defensive efficiency. Clint Kubiak starting to finally force feed Justin Jefferson. He has more than 30% of the team's targets the last 4 weeks. I'll be candid here. Like, I would not be looking to join the early week Pittsburgh party at +4. Haven't joined or haven't bet Minnesota. It just feels like a good spot for Minnesota here in my mind. Did see some early week under money at 45. Listen, if both offenses chose to attack properly and do so from the onset, you couldn't pay me to go under 43.5. But I don't know if we're going to get the optimal strategy from either offense, at least early.
Not a lot of confidence from an offensive game plan structure with two defensive-minded head coaches that prefer 2 yards and a cloud of dust, more so than trusting some of their playmakers that they actually have. But to your point, looking at Pittsburgh, will be very interesting to see what their offensive game plan looks like on the short week, knowing a level of physicality there against the Ravens. And we talked about this in the preseason podcast for the AFC North, that schedule makers did no favors to the Pittsburgh Steelers with the back half of what they were going to have to go through should they be able to punch a ticket to the playoffs or stay in the divisional race. We saw it start last week, a game they were fortunate to win, followed up here with a short week against a pissed off, or what you would think should be a pissed off Minnesota Vikings team, knowing their season hangs in the balance. From a non-conference showdown on Thursday to a divisional game and a rematch of sorts taking place in the AFC West on Sunday. It's the Kansas City Chiefs welcoming in the Las Vegas Raiders. The Chiefs an 8.5-point favorite. Total on this game sits at 47.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. And when you look at the Chiefs, they hung 41 points on Vegas in the first meeting on Sunday Night Football. It was the second most in a game for them this season. In that contest, Vegas struggled to sustain drives. Not exactly a recipe for success against Kansas City, converting just 11% of their third down attempts, their lowest success rate on third down of the entire season. It's already a point of weakness that was obviously made more painful in that loss to Kansas City. When you look at the Raiders, small sample size, but interesting to note, they're undefeated against the spread as dogs of 5+ points this year, but not only have they covered those games, they've won outright. Meanwhile, Kansas City and all that regular season futility we had talked about for great lengths after going 3-14 against the number, well, in the last 3, they're now 3-0 against the spread with a +50 point differential in those contests. An interesting story brewing out here in Las Vegas. Payne, I'm not sure how much credence to put into it, and it'll have no impact on the handicap. But suddenly Dabo Swinney's name being widely circulated with connections to the Raiders as he was donning silver and black last weekend on the sidelines. We know about his relationship with Derek Carr, so just an interesting note to watch. Not the Josh Jacobs having 8 kids with 8 different women that I saw circulating this morning when I was fine-tuning some of my research on the game. When you look at the way the first matchup between these two teams played out, you highlighted the familiarity that Kansas City had dealing with Gus Bradley's defense. He wasn't willing to make adjustments, and we saw Kansas City go out there, attack in space, and put together one of their best, most prolific offensive performances of the year. Do the Raiders, in your opinion, have the personnel to change enough to force Kansas City out of its comfort zone, or is it true what they say about the cliche, a tiger can't change its stripes?
Yeah, I think that's the ultimate handicap here, right? And, it's the Chiefs' offense. It's how the Raiders elect to defend them. In general, it's been relatively ugly for the Chiefs' offense, right? And if you look at the advanced box score last week, like Kansas City beat Denver 19-16 last week, and clearly there wasn't a need for the Chiefs with the actual scoreboard to push. And then we know, that 11-minute drive basically like wiped everything out in terms of like, this is now a 3-quarter game. The two biggest plays in terms of EPA were made by the Chiefs defense on the pick six and then the muffed punt recovery. About 15 expected points added on those two non-offensive plays. So you are looking at a Chiefs offense that, again, relatively is still struggling. Now they're 6th in efficiency, and it's come against about an average schedule of defenses. But to your point, there's a very clear path to giving the Chiefs trouble, and it's one that we've outlined because we talk about the Chiefs every week. And it's like, are you going to make them earn it methodically? And that's what the entire game boils down to here. It's like, what defensive scheme is Gus Bradley going to go with? Is it the traditional cover 3 and cover 1 man concepts? If so, even with some wind, the Chiefs are probably going to have a field day again. And you look at that first matchup, Mahomes and the Chiefs put up 6.8 yards per play, a 57% passing success rate, 6 explosives through the air. Now, Bradley did mix some of his coverages in the first meeting, but he didn't play much too high shell. And so in that Week 10 breakdown, we said, listen, right, like the Raiders aren't really built and don't have the parts to employ that too high strategy. It requires versatile safeties, which Vegas doesn't really have. Now, Trayvon Mullen returned to practice on Wednesday. He didn't play in the first meeting. He's the Raiders' top cover corner. That should help. That should allow you to be a little bit more versatile if Trayvon Mullen can at least eliminate Tyreek from the game a little bit, right? You can be more versatile if you have your best cover corner out there. Andy Reid did a really good job picking on Jonathan Abram in the first matchup, and so that'll be the ultimate debate for Gus Bradley is how much Jonathan Abram plays in this game. In totality, he has had a bounce-back season, but in this matchup, specifically the first one, Andy Reid just picked on him. Mahomes picked on him, right? Jonathan Abram was targeted 9 times in coverage, gave up 9 receptions for 127 yards and 2 touchdowns. Mahomes had a perfect passer rating when targeting Abram. So maybe he won't be on the field as much this week. We'll see. Maybe that's part of the adjustment. There's not much that's changed from the last time we discussed these teams. I think we're going to know pretty quickly what Gus Bradley can do scheme-wise here. Either way, Andy Reid and his offense need to be, improved down the home stretch, right? If Gus sticks with the traditional defense, it's time to build some confidence, right, and put up a big number. If Gus makes the change too high, it's time to be able to move it methodically, right? And not just like throw up on yourself, right? It can't take 14 weeks to rectify this issue. And it's across the board, right? Mahomes' play is down, but 5 drops last week. On the season, only 3 of Mahomes' 12 interceptions have actually graded out turnover worthy. So the receivers are not doing very well. Not the biggest receivers when you're looking at Tyreek and Pringle having these massive catch radiuses. Teams are eliminating the speed element by playing that too high shell. So basically, Tyreek Hill has turned into a guy that needs to rely on his route skills and hands. And those are probably 2 of the lesser skill sets that he has, right? His speed element is his best element. Travis Kelce doing a better job recently, getting back to his old self and beating man coverage. But right now, there just aren't the parts offensively that everyone thinks. They were desperate. They were in need of finding that third option, and they still haven't found it yet. So to combat that, right, we're going to be looking at a different offense. Clyde Edwards-Helaire and that offensive line are going to be relied on when defenses go to this too high shell look. And then you're going to have to avoid the turnover bug. And that's basically the gist of what the Chiefs' offense can be if they face this. We just don't know if they're going to face it this week. And that's ultimately, while our model showed some value, again, towards the under, like it did in the first matchup, we didn't play this. We didn't get out ahead of this and go under 49 because we're just not quite sure what Gus Bradley is going to employ here.
You predicted it when the Raiders parted ways with John Gruden that we were going to see a drop-off in the offense. We weren't sure how long it was going to take, but inevitably it came. The Raiders have now scored 16 or less points in 4 out of 5 games. The one anomaly, of course, is the game everybody watched on Thanksgiving against the Dallas Cowboys. Kansas City defensively, this team has been outstanding, allowing just 11.2 points per game during their 5-game win streak, fewer than 20 points allowed in every game, where they allowed 29 points per game previously when everyone wanted to talk about how porous the defense was. I love some of the comments coming from Tyrann Mathieu talking about the group playing more cohesively as a unit to get the defense where it needed to go. Obviously, significantly easier when you're healthier on that side of the ball and you have a lot of key contributors. This group still shown vulnerability even last Sunday night against Javonte Williams, but when you're playing from a deficit, it's tough on opponents to stay committed to the ground game, and Josh Jacobs not nearly as explosive as what the Broncos could bring. If you're Las Vegas and you're trying to figure out a game plan, how are you going about attacking this suddenly resurgent Kansas City defense that's been amongst the league best over the last 5-6 weeks?
It's going to be difficult. And just kind of looking at current form, these units are going in opposite directions, right? The Raiders' offense is trending down, the Chiefs' defense trending up. And I think these are always really important to look at and uncover this time of year, right? Like, these teams change so much. Every month or so, you really need to be evaluating what their current form is. So sample size matters, but trending metrics do as well, and being able to see both and assess both is massive. Since the Raiders' Week 8 bye, they're a below average offense, 19th in EPA per play. Still better passing than running. Offense hasn't been good aside from the Dallas game out of the break, which we kind of identified the reason why, and it's because it's a defensive scheme that they are seeing every day at practice with what they see from Gus Bradley, right? I mean, just a mirror image defense, Gus Bradley and Dan Quinn. So that was a familiar type of look that they could plan for. When you look at this, though, there's just not a lot of weapons, right? Like, Waller still hasn't practiced. We know Ruggs is gone. D-Jax at his age, 35, just turned, can't handle a full load. So it's Zay Jones and it's Bryan Edwards on the outside. That's the area where, you potentially want to attack the Chiefs a little bit. But when Derek Carr targets Zay Jones, he's got a 59 passer rating. Bryan Edwards is averaging 1.2 yards per route run despite a 16.5-yard ADOT, right? I mean, it's bad. Waller, Ruggs, and especially the way Ruggs was playing, he turned into a full-time receiver, right? It wasn't just a guy with speed. And then Renfrow in the slot. That was a fantastic trio, and their skill sets kind of complemented each other really well. Now it's just Renfrow. And you can bracket him. His route tree doesn't include a lot of third and longs. So it's very difficult right now with the weapons that the Raiders have. You lose Kenyon Drake and his ability to catch balls out of the backfield. He's
Love
a guy
the Drake.
that was averaging,
Love the Drake.
He was averaging 1.7 yards per route run despite a 1.2-yard ADOT. Does that tell you how unproductive Bryan Edwards and Jay Jones have been? And so you're looking at the Chiefs like they just continue to surge. It was another good outing. I think if you have another one here, you may crack the full season efficiency average sector. But the trending metrics have looked real solid. Since Week 6, the Chiefs are top 10 in both rushing and drop back EPA allowed per play. Let's keep our eyes on Darren Waller. Was a DNP all last week despite the added rest coming off the Thanksgiving game. He was a DNP yesterday. That's the one area where the Chiefs defense is still vulnerable, giving up nearly 11.5 yards of reception to the tight end position and 6 touchdowns. Kansas City still bottom 10 in both counting stats and efficiency metrics defending tight ends. So not having Waller there is massive. We saw Foster Moreau, didn't really have the performance we expected out of him last week against Washington, right? We only had the one data point earlier in the season where without Darren Waller, the Raiders were still 4th in EPA. Now, different play callers you alluded to, and I think that's the other aspect here. It's like we now have the book on what they want to do offensively, and you've seen quotes coming out of the Raiders. We want to run the ball a little bit more. We saw Jason Lockenfor report that before Thanksgiving. Didn't really do that last week, and I understand why, right? The game plan wasn't terrible. Josh Jacobs, I think, had 13 carries last week. You did want to pass the ball on Washington. That was the way to attack them. Unfortunately, you just don't have the chess pieces to operate in that style. So, tough matchup here for the Raiders. Now, the Chiefs do have this bust element to them because they play very aggressively and Spags loves to blitz. So there is potential to hit an explosive or two here, and maybe that changes the elements of this game and forces the Chiefs offense to come alive a little bit more. That's obviously the goal in this game, but I don't really see a path here where the Raiders are going to have a ton of success. I just don't. Now, in terms of price, this is a game where Kansas City was laying 2.5 on the road in Week 10. Be very kind here and give 1.5 of home field advantage in in each way, which is 3 points. So maybe 5.5 was what this number would have said back in Week 10. Now we're at 10 some places. So the price really isn't overly conducive to backing the Chiefs here in any manner.
It is always interesting when you look at the closing number for Kansas City last weekend against the Denver Broncos, as low as 8. At some of the sharper shops, here they are laying 9.5 against the Raiders. I'll leave that for our listeners to decide which team they like better, the Broncos or Raiders, given what the market is suggesting at this current juncture. From one divisional matchup in the AFC West to the now officially muddled AFC North playoff picture, it's the Baltimore Ravens taking on the Cleveland Browns. And as we talk about schedule makers doing no favors for the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think the Baltimore Ravens can fall into that same bucket as well, because these two teams played just a few short weeks ago on Sunday Night Football, a game the Ravens won 16-10. The Ravens go to the Steel City. The Browns get the week off, a chance to rest, regroup, and review what went wrong the first time around. Cleveland, a 2.5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game sits at 42. Although we are seeing a little bit of over money enter the market earlier today at other shops. Two of the top rushing teams in the National Football League. Remaining schedules as tough as there are in the league for both these teams with very little margin for error. When you look at the Baltimore Ravens, this will be the first time that Cleveland is favored over them in 11 straight meetings. And 24 out of the last 25 the Ravens had been favored in. So the hunter becomes the hunted as we see a little bit of a role reversal. Meanwhile, though, Lamar Jackson in his career has been outstanding when catching points, 8-1 against the spread, 7-2 straight up. The Ravens, 12-1 against the number. The last 13 regular season games they've played as underdogs. However, Kevin Stefanski and company have put together a tremendous record when it comes to bouncing back. 9-1 straight up following a loss. The only head coach right now in the league with a better winning percentage than that off a loss would be Coach LaFleur in Green Bay. I give you all of that to ask this, Payne. Should we expect Baker Mayfield to be significantly healthier with 2 weeks to prepare, or will we see the same Baker that struggled with accuracy immensely against the Baltimore Ravens 2 weeks ago, even though the Ravens will be down their top cover corner for the remainder of the season in Marlon Humphrey?
Ultimately, that's what's going to decide this game in my mind, and you are spot on. There was some very sharp over money at 41.5 this morning. We're now out to 43, still some lingering 42.5 out there. I want to see Kevin Stefanski throw a curveball and come out aggressive. And he did that a little bit in the Week 12 matchup. And to me, it worked, right? Like if you look at the first down stuff, Baker Mayfield threw it 16 times and the Browns only ran it 9 times in the matchup in Week 12. And I think it makes sense, right? Like Kevin Stefanski is an analytical guy. And if you look and your first down runs are averaging 1.7 yards and your first down passes are averaging 7.2, that's a strategy that you probably need to employ. And I think that's a down Baker Mayfield feels most comfortable throwing, right? When he's not forced to make a play on a do or die down, right? When he can throw with play action. And I think for Kevin Stefanski offense, play action probably works its best on first down. Baker Mayfield, with play action, passer ratings 23 points higher. His yards per pass attempt increases more than 4 yards, so his big-time throw rate doubles. And if you look since Week 7, the Ravens are 28th in EPA pass defense. Going into the Pittsburgh game, all 5 contributing members of the Ravens secondary missed substantial practice time for one reason or another. Now their very best cover corner, Marlon Humphrey, is out. At Wednesday's practice this week, 6 guys were listed on the injury report from that secondary. I would suspect most of them will play, but there's just so many guys dealing with nagging injuries and illnesses that I think that's probably the strategy for Cleveland to have success throwing on early downs. Now Baltimore can't load the box and send run blitzes like Wink Martindale did so well in Week 12, right? It opens things back up for the ground game, and I think that's the formula to beating Baltimore in my mind. Attack through the air on early downs. Don't run into the loaded boxes and run blitzes. That's basically, forcing Baker to then throw on second and third and long. And, you think about that strategy, right? If we're handing it off on first down every single time and Wink is able to line up these run blitzes and you're sitting in 2nd and 10 and 2nd and 11 and maybe one squeaks through and it's 2nd and 7, all of a sudden Baker's forced to be a passer in known passing situations with his right tackle Jack Conklin out, and then you're getting these exotic wink blitzes. That's not the path. So this just feels like a strategy where you need to be aggressive on early downs. Also, massive advantage here for the Browns, and the market is seemingly indicating that as well, taking them from a 1-point dog out to a 2.5-point favorite, and it's that 3 weeks to prepare for the same defense, right? A defense that does pretty much the same thing. So I would not be shocked in the least to see something where Stefanski's uber aggressive here early. I know OBJ's gone, the tight end room a little bit beat up. Let's see if Chubb and Hunt get on the field at the same time, right? That's something that you can come up with out of a bye. The Ravens are giving up more than 10.5 yards of reception to running backs. Let's be creative with Donovan Peoples-Jones. It's clear that's Baker Mayfield's security blanket. He feels extremely comfortable throwing to him. When you're looking at Baker's passer rating when targeting Donovan Peoples-Jones, it's 142. He's a big target with a large catch radius. He's got a 92% contested catch rate. For a quarterback that is searching for confidence, and to your point, Todd, isn't overly accurate right now, having that big target's pretty vital. I think if Cleveland plays this right, their offense is going to have some opportunities here.
I don't want to be one of those guys that plays Monday morning quarterback, but when you look at the situation brewing, I mean, Payne, do you think during the bye week it had to enter Kevin Stefanski's mind that if Baker continues to be limited and struggle with accuracy, that you would go to a veteran knowing all the other pieces around him are still very much in place and it's not going to be a huge drop-off from Baker operating at a 60-65% capacity to Case Keenum at 100%?
Yeah, I don't know what Baker Mayfield's health level is. You would expect if Kevin Stefanski starting him 2 weeks ago, he's starting him here off the bye. Case Keenum is what he is. He's a guy that's going to operate the offense, but clearly his peak isn't going to be Baker's.
Yep.
And I think there's some other elements here to the offense, right? Stefanski's cognizant of this, right? People have changed the way they're defending him, and he's a young, an up-and-coming mind, and he's also in that process of navigating the adjustments that he's seeing. The run game hasn't quite been there. The offensive line has been beat up a little bit. The weapons aren't plentiful, and they've been beat up. So this just isn't a Baker thing. But to your point, I do believe the leash is somewhat short. This is an all-in game, right? Like, Baltimore looks extremely vulnerable. You now have your head-to-head matchup here. You can get back within a game of the division. So this game, there are no throwaways at this point in the season for Baltimore. But certainly this becomes a game where I can tell you what's happening in that building, right? This is their Super Bowl. This is the most important game that Cleveland's had the last 2 years in the Stefanski era outside of the playoff game against the Chiefs. This is it right here. And that's the vibe that's kind of permeated throughout that organization in the last 2 weeks.
Pretty interesting when you look at the Ravens. They were 6-1, or at least 6-1 if you believe they were going to be on the outside looking in for the playoffs going into the game against the Steelers. That number now down to plus 360, and we'll see if the Browns can help put another nail into that coffin this weekend. On the other side, when you look at Baltimore's offense, Payne, I'm not being a rocket scientist by any stretch of the imagination to say it's struggling. And the last time we saw Lamar go up against this Browns defense, the Browns employed a ton of cover 3 and cover 4, playing it nearly 80% of the time, and Lamar threw 4 interceptions in that particular football game. When you look at Lamar so far this year, 37 sacks, it leads the league. 16 turnovers has him tied for the most, and a turnover margin for the Ravens in general is -8. It's tied for the third worst in the NFL, and if things continue along the same trajectory, it would be the worst for a playoff team since 2012. Let's not sugarcoat it. When you're keeping company with the Jets, Jaguars, and Chicago Bears, not exactly a ringing endorsement for a team that we thought was going to be more versatile this season with a drop-back passing element integrated into things.
Spot on. I mean, Lamar has not been very good, and he's making some game-changing mistakes, and he's not seeing the field overly well, and he's missing reads. And if you look at a metric that merges EPA per play and completion percentage above expectation, Lamar Jackson among qualifying quarterbacks is the second worst in the NFL since Week 7. Only Trevor Lawrence has been worse. So that is a difficult piece of company to keep there. And I think there's multiple reasons for that. And there's probably a bunch of reasons that I don't see for that being the case, right? I'm not in that organization. I'm not in that locker room. I'm sure there's things going on there that no one can see. But the one thing that's clear is Lamar's pressing a little bit. It's not just Baker Mayfield looking for a new contract this summer, okay? And so I know that's been discussed, and suddenly if you aren't the guy that can carry an offense when some of its parts are down, what does that contract look like? He's also battled multiple weeks of illness, but the true turmoil with this offense is it's built to be run first, and everything else primarily comes off the run game. Well, the O-line's struggling, right? It's not the unit it once was, and then the injury bug hit and continues to linger a bit. So Baltimore right now, 29th in offensive line yards, and that's against the fourth easiest schedule of run defense to date. So the big guys up front aren't creating space. Lamar is a quarterback that holds on to the ball pretty long. That hasn't changed. That's been him. He kind of lives in that 3-second time to throw window, but the pressure rates are up to 37% this year. Lamar's been sacked 11 more times than last season, and we're only there's 5 weeks left. And it also feels like Greg Roman's kind of ran out of creativity, something we said he would need to continue implementing new things. And it's, his job's as tough as it gets, I think, as an offensive coordinator. And it feels like, he's going to be the scapegoat. If you read some of the articles out there, people talking about firing him, and he's the reason for this offense struggling. It couldn't possibly be the poor O-line or the horrific running backs or Lamar having a down year. Now, even from a clean pocket, Lamar has struggled, and I think that's kind of the telling sign here. It's just he needs to pick up his play, and it's not just what that means for the rest of the offense, but like he's kind of the guy. He's the energy of that entire huddle, so he needs to get it going a little bit. Now, to a lot of the people's points, like Greg Roman hasn't really figured out the counter to some of the blitzes they're seeing. We saw Miami expose Baltimore where they employ that strategy where you send blitz off the edge, make your other edge set wide to keep Lamar contained, and then force him to read and react early. Pittsburgh had a similar strategy last week, blitzed Lamar on 41% of his dropbacks. And so when Lamar's blitzed, he has more picks than touchdowns this year. Not good. His yards per pass attempt dip a full yard. So the aggression goes down and the difficulty of pass increases. That's not really a formula you want if you're the Ravens offense. This is also a unique situation for Cleveland. And I mentioned it on the other side of the ball, but it bears repeating here. Like, how embarrassing would it be for Joe Woods to have 3 weeks preparing for the same struggling Baltimore offense and not be able to contain it? So the guys up front for Cleveland need to regroup, hopefully a little bit healthier along the line. If you remember going back to our breakdown against the Patriots in Week 10 saying, Cleveland's third in defensive rush efficiency. But we did point out some holes in their run defense, and we thought the style New England runs with might give Baltimore issues, or might give Cleveland issues, rather. Those issues have been pretty spotted, I guess, and other offenses since then are taking that same approach because the 3 games prior to Cleveland's bye, they're 29th in EPA per rush allowed, so that has to get better. Cleveland did have a nice strategy in the first meeting. They're kind of made Baltimore more situational runners. 3.4 a carry is what Baltimore had offensively. That's a number you're like happy holding the Ravens' run game too. But 14 rushing first downs, 49% rushing success rate. Did also give up 3 explosives. So it was really weird. It's like we were containing Lamar, but they were still kind of moving the chains. You're looking at 2 guys that I think are probably vital to this game plan for Joe Woods, and it's JOK and it's Delpit. They'll be huge in this matchup. Both are kind of fast and physical, which you need against the Ravens offense, kind of being able to help in the run game but cover a physical tight end like Andrews while also being fast enough to contain Lamar. That's kind of a rare skill set, and that's specifically why the Browns drafted JOK for this matchup. And in the first meeting, whether it was Delpit or JOK, they graded out far and away the best 2 defenders the Browns had on the field against Baltimore. I think you probably go back to that where you're scheming your defense around those 2 guys to come up with a game plan to defend Baltimore. But this has got to be an all-in effort here from Cleveland on both sides of the ball. If you can't win this game with 3 weeks to prepare for the same team, a team that is struggling, a team that is beat up, there's going to be some questions this offseason.
Well, I think there are plenty of questions right now. I mean, there's no doubt that this team has struggled with injury luck, unfortunately, but the reality of it, they were picked by many to win the division, picked by many to go over their win total. We know the Pythag suggested a little bit of regression, but I don't think built into some of those regression numbers were the fact that this team was going to miss so many starts from key contributors. We'll see if Cleveland can get their season back on track with a big win in the division against the Baltimore Ravens. From one divisional game to yet another, this one in the nation's capital, where it's the Dallas Cowboys on the road against the Washington football team. The Cowboys, a 4-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game sits at 48 right now. When you look at Washington, Payne, it's almost history repeating itself. They've now won and covered 4 straight games since starting the season, 2-6 straight up, and 1-7 against the spread. Last season, they became the second team in NFL history to start 2-6 and make the playoffs. Let's see if they're able to do that again now. Meanwhile, when you look at Washington, I mean, things have clearly improved. The defense back on track. They were giving up 28 points per game during that 2-6 stretch start. They're now holding opponents to 17.5 points per game. Opponent third down percentage has dropped from 57%, which was a league worst, to now 31%. And when you look at Washington last year, they swept the Cowboys for the first time since 2012. Obviously, Dak Prescott nor Taylor Heinicke started either of those games. Dak, on the other hand, when he's matched up against Washington, has had a tremendous amount of success, going 7-1 straight up, 6-2 against the number, and those 8 games, 7-1 to the over. Dak in those contests has led the Cowboys offense to nearly 32 points per game, despite modest passing numbers, a shade more than 230, but he's done a great job protecting the football, 17 touchdowns to just 1 interception. When you look at Washington, there's no doubt they figured things out a little bit, but this could be a much bigger challenge against an explosive offense that they're going to encounter in the Dallas Cowboys. With extra time to prepare, the second straight week Washington will take on an opponent that played the previous week on Thursday night.
You know, we've really seen this before from the Cowboys offense, and specifically Kellen Moore, where they come out of the gates on absolute fire, and people are praising Kellen, and media members are calling him the hot OC and clamoring for him to get a head gig, and then things start to progressively get worse as the season goes along. I'm not saying that's the case this season. Certainly there's been issues out of Kellen Moore's control over the last month or so with injuries and COVID and, you name it. But if you do look at some trending metrics here, the first 6 weeks before the bye, the Cowboys were 4th in EPA per play. Since the bye, 23rd in EPA per play offense. This is the week where there's no excuses for Dallas, right? Amari Cooper can handle a full load stamina-wise. La'el Collins was a full game on Thursday against the Saints. You have extra rest and prep playing that Thursday night game. Washington, this is going to be their 3rd game in 13 days, including a game that ended after midnight Eastern and then a trip to the West Coast and back. So this needs to kind of be the Mona Lisa performance from the Cowboys, specifically on offense here, if they're going to be true Super Bowl contenders. To me, Washington is still very much a pass funnel defense, 30th in defensive pass efficiency, but top 10 against the run, 30th in EPA per play when you remove garbage time. The scoreboard, as you mentioned, looks good defensively, and there has been some marginal improvement for Washington's defense post-bye, but if you actually dig into like some of the stuff, right, since the bye, Washington's still 24th in EPA per play allowed. And this is why down-to-down stats matter and not just the scoreboard when it comes to finding value in these markets, because Washington's offense is living on the field, which means Washington's defense has been on the sidelines drinking Gatorade and eating Mom's oranges, right? That's basically what's transpired here the last 4 weeks. Washington's defense.
Seattle Seahawks 2.0, what we saw last year. Defense didn't get better. They just weren't on the field to give up points and plays.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, Washington right now, they've averaged a shade of more than 22 minutes defensively on the field since the bye. That's it. And looking game by game since the bye, like, take nothing away, right? The defensive effort against Tom Brady and the Buccaneers, especially with Sweat out and Chase Young goes down in game. Great performance, right? Awesome performance. Best of the season. But the last 3 games, you've played Carolina in Cam Newton's first start in an offense that wasn't catered to his skill set. It's the Seahawks, whose offense was arguably struggling more than any in the NFL when you factor in who the quarterback and talent is. And then a Raiders offense that we've talked about at the top of this show that's outside the top 20 in EPA since they're buying. If you remove the Cowboys game against a mirror image defense the Raiders see in practice daily, the Raiders are a bottom 5 offense over this stretch. No Waller, no Ruggs, a hobbled Djax, right, that only played on 40% of snaps last week. So they really have not played many great offenses, or offenses that aren't beat up, or offenses that are trending hot. Like, that just hasn't been the case the last 3 games. This is a far different task for Washington going against Cooper, Lamb, and Gallup. This feels like a really good spot for the Cowboys offense to have success. We've seen when all 3 receivers are healthy, CeeDee Lamb slides to the slot more frequently and becomes an absolute nightmare matchup there. Washington's been horrific defending slot receivers, giving up a league-high 8 touchdowns to slot receivers. If Dallas can't find success here, it's time to downgrade the Cowboys a tick or two, Todd.
Yeah, I mean, this was a team who we knew had all the bells and whistles. They had all the pieces, a dynamic receiving core, a 2-headed monster in the backfield, albeit Ezekiel Elliott taking on a little bit of water, and an offensive line that, while not at the peak of what we saw a couple of years ago, was still going to be dynamic enough. We'll see if it shows up on full display this weekend. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ball, when you look at the Washington football team, the big injury for them, Payne, they lose their primary red zone threat in Logan Thomas, out for the season. I know he's dealt with injuries all season long, but unfortunate to see him completely shelled, because you saw what kind of impact he can make on the opening drive last week, much to our delight and the listeners as well. When you look at some of the other weapons, Antonio Gibson taking on an increased workload, but I don't have the efficiency numbers in front of me. I can't say that he's overly efficient if he's not methodical. I mean, he's catching balls, he's running, overly explosive. Probably the right terminology there. We know what Terry McLaurin can be on the outside. We'll see how the Cowboys elect to neutralize him. But this is a Cowboys defense who should be trending up with some key components potentially back in the fold.
You know, Washington's offense has come out of the bye and played bully, right? They've chosen violence, basically, and for good reason, right? Like, Washington's number 1 and run block win rates, the best unit on the offense. And despite not being fully healthy along the O-line, they've done a really, really good job creating space. You mentioned Antonio Gibson. He does look healthier with this shin injury than he did towards the middle part of the season. And it's not the most efficient run game. You're spot on there. It's more of a counting stats type run game. It's keep us in third and manageable type run game. And that, along with improved accuracy from Taylor Heinicke since the bye, has basically been the recipe to Washington converting 50% of third downs and averaging 38 minutes of possession post-bye. That's basically the gist of it. Washington has to be able to run it here, right? Now, it does concern me that even though the counting stats, because of volume, make Washington's run game look decent, but their efficiency metrics are not very good, right? And so that'll be the question here. Now, the Cowboys' weakness defensively, 19th in both rush efficiency and EPA per rush allowed this season, but they do get much healthier, right? DeMarcus Lawrence was back last week, only played 37 snaps against the States. I would envision a full plate for him this week. Randy Gregory set to return along the defensive line along with Neville Gallimore, the third-round interior lineman from Oklahoma last season. So you get 3 key cogs now healthy on the Cowboys' defensive line. Micah Parsons now goes back to linebacker, where you can use him as a blitzer and spy Taylor Heinicke, which is much needed in this matchup because he does love to leak out from time to time. What's really interesting to me about the Cowboys' defense is, after all of the early luck with Diggs and the interceptions and the balls being picked off and the defense racking up scores, Cowboys are 4th in defensive pass efficiency, and they've played a top 10 schedule of offenses. It's really wild to think about the Cowboys' pass defense and also Washington's pass offense. It's good on good here. 2 really unsuspecting elements for each team nobody could have really projected or envisioned coming into the season. Washington has to find a way for this game not to be played in a phone booth offensively, right? With the Cowboys getting these front 7 pieces back, Washington has to hit an explosive or 2 to get the ground game to be a little bit more efficient. You have to have the defense respect Terry McLaurin a little bit deeper down the field. I think there's going to be some regression in those third down conversions I mentioned post-bye. But we're looking at Washington's offense 23rd in explosive passing since the bye. On the season, they're 26th in 20-plus yard gash plays. So this is really a methodical offense, and eventually you're going to have a slew of penalties one game, right? You're going to have a situation where you're not going to be able to pick up 3rd and 4 at an extremely unsustainable rate. I'll be candid. We were hoping to buy down to a manageable 3 here on Dallas. We had buy orders set up for -3, -18 or better. The lowest it got in the market was 3 -22 on Wednesday around 11 a.m. And then a group that we don't really speak with went out and said, hey, we're okay laying 3.5 and saw 4, and that's why we're now out to 4.5 and 5 some places on this game.
Question for you, more about player personnel than anything else. Have you been surprised with the kind of impact that Micah Parsons has had as a rookie? When you look at some of his numbers, they blew me away when I was digging into this game. A pressure rate of 22%, first in the league. He's tied for first in terms of tackles for loss. Quarterback hits ranks 4th behind only Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa, and TJ Watt, a real who's who. And his sack numbers, he's tied for 8th with 10. I mean, this was a guy, Payne, coming into the draft when he opted out at Penn State, that the knock against him was he didn't really love football. I'd hate to see how disruptive he could be if he actually fell in love with the game again.
I would say no. I think everyone in the world knew the talent Micah Parsons was, and I think everyone knew that his best attribute was as a pass rusher, and that was the ultimate debate, and that was the ultimate, we're going to roll our eyes at selecting a linebacker this early in the draft, and it's because if you make him a traditional linebacker, it's a position that doesn't have a ton of value, and you're now asking Micah Parsons to be extremely cerebral and read coverages and defend tight ends. Where he's best suited is getting to the quarterback. So it doesn't shock me at all that he's able to get to the quarterback, and he's actually been far more efficient and effective as a defensive end. So that ultimately will be a decision that this organization has to make at some point, because he is far more effective as an edge rusher. So whether it's DeMarcus Lawrence getting up there in age, whether it's not being able to trust Randy Gregory, although it feels like a very good contract because no one's going to give Randy Gregory a ton of money. So if you can get him on the cheap for his skill set, awesome. But that's something that the organization will probably have to figure out down the line, because he is a substantially better defensive end than he is a linebacker.
Hey, I got to give the Cowboys credit, putting him in a position to excel. And like you said, I think those past defensive efficiency numbers kind of would blow the casual fan away when there's still skepticism about how they've performed on that side of the ball amid some recent struggles, still knowing they're very much in control of their NFC East destiny with a win this weekend against the Washington football team. For all the division,
and if you're him and his agent, you also want him to be a defensive end and not
100%. 100%. You want to go to the negotiating table going, yeah, look at these sack numbers. I want to be classified as a defensive end, and I want to be paid like the Von Millers and company of the world.
There's no doubt about that. The market's getting absolutely shredded as we're on the podcast this morning. It's no shock. Denver just buried out to 10. Some illness running through the Detroit Lions locker room, including Jared Goff.
Biting kneecaps, apparently not good to try and help your immune system. Who knew how some of that worked? And potential partying when you're out till 4 a.m. in the Motor City in wake of celebrating your first victory. The immune system can get run down a little bit. Buffalo and Tampa, clearly the crown jewel potentially on the Week 14 NFL slate. Not a divisional game, but still massive implications for both respective conferences. You're looking at Tampa, a 3-point favorite, lay $1.15 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total on the game, 53.5, as they'll welcome in the Bills, hopefully into better conditions for Buffalo for an offensive standpoint. Two of the top teams extending drives on third downs. Both have flirted with nearly a 50% success rate so far this season. We know Tom Brady's ownership of the Bills goes way back to his days, obviously, in New England. His last loss against that franchise came in 2014. The Bucs, they've been cooking at home. They've won their last 4 at Raymond James Stadium by 20-plus points. I'm not quite sure, Payne, how much we downgrade Tampa for Bruce Arians in a walking boot after injuring his Achilles leading up to last week's game. But when you look at Buffalo, this is a team that's shown a ton of vulnerability when they step up in class versus the winning teams on their schedule. 7-point loss against the Steelers, 3-point loss to Tennessee. They were blown out by Indianapolis, and they struggled, obviously, on Monday night against the New England Patriots. They have bounced back, but it's come against inferior foes. While Josh Allen has been outstanding as a road underdog in his career, 7-0-2 against the spread the last 9 times, this is a different beast in the form of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And while everyone wants to laud Buffalo's defense for their season-long metrics, you and I know that there is a little bit of noise in those numbers when they step up in class this weekend.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that make the Buccaneers offense versus Bills defensive matchup really fascinating. And, we already believe and candidly know Buffalo's defense isn't the best in football, regardless of what Football Outsiders tells you. And, they just use a formula. It's not really on them, right? Like, you got to tweak the formula maybe a little bit, but we've questioned this unit for over a month now, right? It's a Buffalo defense that we think probably sits in the 4 to 8 range. It's a Buffalo defense that's played the easiest schedule of offenses, and they've been helped by weather. The quarterbacks have been downright dreadful. I mean, Jacoby Brissett, Davis Mills, Trevor Lawrence, Mike White, Trevor Siemian on a short week. The best quarterbacks on Buffalo's schedule are Tua, Taylor Heineke in a windstorm, Ryan Tannehill, Carson Wentz in severe weather, and then Mac Jones in the worst weather of the entire NFL season to date. There's question marks about your defense, clearly. And this matchup here, this isn't the Patriots offense throwing 3 times all game because there's 28-mile-per-hour winds and 55-mile-per-hour gusts. Like, we're going to find out what Buffalo's defense truly is, and it might be worse than a top 8 unit. It really could be. And I think we will see, at least early, maybe a motivated Buffalo defense that's flying around after being dragged through the mud for 48 hours this week by local media and analysts. But this is going to be a really, really tough defense, right? Like, you have struggled throughout the course of the year, as you allude to, when you step up in class. And it's like, now you get Tampa. It's the most efficient offense in the NFL. It's the most efficient passing attack in the league. And they are also at home, where Tampa's offense has been on another planet good. And you're going to do it without Tre'Davious White. It's the one star in game changer Buffalo had on defense. And really, when you look at the makeup of the Bills' defense under McDermott, it's always kind of been, better than the sum of its parts kind of thing. But Tre'Davious White was like the horse. He was the guy. It was the one guy that allowed you to potentially match up and remove someone. And now you're without him. We know that the pass defense has been aided somewhat by weather. And I think we're going to see that life without Tre'Davious White really sucks. The other advantage Buffalo has most weeks is their ability to get after the quarterback. They're number 1 in pressure rate, 5th in pass rush win rate. They've spent money and draft capital there the past 2 seasons. The potential hurdle this week is Tampa's number 1 in the NFL in pressure rate allowed, under 20%. Number 1 in sack rate allowed. Part of that's Tom Brady. He still kind of hunts the big play, but it's a very strategic hunting, and most times Brady's getting rid of the ball quickly. 3rd fastest time to throw, only behind Big Ben and Tua. So now you have a situation for Buffalo where you're down your top cover corner against the number 1 passing attack, and the part of the defense that can help the secondary probably gets negated by the Buccaneers' offensive line. We do want to monitor the Ryan Jensen situation, but he did finish the game against Atlanta. Missed practice on Wednesday, but let's monitor that. But it is a better sign that he was able to finish the game against Atlanta in terms of how he bodes, for playing this week. This feels like a game where Buffalo's defense gets exposed a little bit. And I can tell you a couple groups feel that way because we've seen this total when it dipped as low as 51.5 at one shop and started trending towards 52 at other shops. They sprung into action, and that is why we are out to 53.5. So there has been some sharp over money there.
You talk about some of the questions and just the kind of impact that Trey White has had on this team. Most targets this season without allowing a passing touchdown before he went down hurt, was allowing a 47% completion percentage when targeted, 3rd lowest in the NFL with a minimum of 50 targets, and 4.6 yards allowed per target, fewest in the NFL with a minimum of 50 targets. And that, of course, Payne came against a murderer's row of quarterbacks: Mac Jones, albeit 3 passing attempts, Trevor Siemian, Carson Wentz, who only had 20 pass attempts given the fact the Bills could not stop Jonathan Taylor, Mike White, Trevor Lawrence, and Tua beforehand. So you talk about a shock to the system. That's what the Bucs can bring to the table in this spot. Meanwhile, when you look at the other side of the ball, I think Josh Allen unfairly received a lot of criticism for Buffalo's inability to get things going offensively. Against the New England Patriots. We know he can throw the football through the wind. I was surprised they honestly didn't take more vertical shots. I think you were surprised that they didn't have more design runs, as we thought that could be an element that they could utilize. Against this Tampa Bay defense, where do you see the Bills' offense having any potential advantages when they're developing a game plan?
I would think we have reached the floor at this point with only one direction to go, but up for Buffalo's offense. Now, again, it's not the end of the world, right? The sky isn't falling. It's still a slightly above average offense by the numbers, 14th in efficiency. And just like Kansas City and other pass-first offenses, defense have adjusted. But we're also not getting the same from Brian Daboll. And I don't know what it is, right? Whether it's his new agent or feedback from interviews he took this offseason or Sean McDermott. Something's going on there, right? There's a lot of less efficient things being called this season than last. Passing on first down is down. Running on second down and medium to long is up. Play action is down a fraction. Maybe it's something personable. We know, Brian Daboll lost both his parental figures within the last couple months, but it's not the same strategies and game plans and play calling that we saw from Brian Daboll last season. And that's kind of disappointing to see. Josh Allen has also not come close to playing at last year's level. And now I think the talent questions are on full display with this offense, right? Like, great play caller, great quarterback can cover up a lot of average. And when you look at Buffalo, every receiver on the roster is small, with small catch radiuses. When you're turning to Matt Breida as your number one tailback, that's trouble, right? He's a guy the Dolphins cut last year, and both their number one and number two running backs are undrafted guys. The offensive line is middling and has been dealing with injuries. And so Josh Allen has obviously come down a step, and Brian Daboll has come down a step, and all those other things are now transpiring. We didn't really notice those issues last year when Daboll's calling games at peak and Josh Allen's playing at peak. Now it's just like this. It's an issue across the board, right? But this does feel like a week where Brian Daboll just needs to say, fuck it, right? And just unleash the offense, right? Get back to doing what you do best. Get back to last season's flow. Air the ball out. Attack the Buccaneers secondary. And the Buccaneers haven't been as good at stopping the run this year as they were last. I get that, but it's still, it's still top 10. The path for success is through the air here. Mike Edwards was suspended for 3 games. Jamel Dean left last week with a concussion. Let's see if he clears protocol. Jordan Whitehead missed last week with a calf injury. Didn't practice on Wednesday. Richard Sherman has been activated from IR. Still a 21-day window to upgrade him for game action. So there are some things to monitor in that Buccaneers secondary from now until kickoff, which would give potentially Buffalo a better chance here to operate that strategy through the air. But if you just look across the board, the game plan it should be simple, right? Like, it kind of just smacks you in the face. If you look, the teams that have given the Buccaneers a run this season are teams that have thrown it. Dallas in the opener, Dak threw 58 times, lost by 2. Stafford and the Rams won. Jameis threw 10 passes in the opening quarter, and the Saints built the lead before he went out with an injury. Taylor Heineke threw 28 passes the first 3 quarters. Carson Wentz threw 44 times. Cowboys, Rams, Saints, Washington, and the Colts all had aggressive game plans to throw and attack the Buccaneers early. Those 5 teams either won or kept the game within 1 score. The Buccaneers are actually a minus 20 in scoring differential in those 5 games. So the plan is like just very obvious, smack you in the face. Let's get this thing rolling. So Buffalo has to lean on a full-blown passing attack here. And if Josh Allen can handle the blitz, the Bills are going to score some points. Now that's kind of the question here. Allen has not been great against the blitz this year. Tampa blitzes at a league-high 39% rate. Josh Allen's outside the top 25 in completion rate and yards per pass attempt among qualifying quarterbacks when blitzed. Buffalo appears to be taking it slow with John Feliciano. He was supposed to be back for Monday night. He wasn't. He's been practicing. Let's see if he's activated. Would be a huge get back. We've discussed his role in identifying blitzes and getting the offensive line a little bit more organized. Would be massive in a game like this. A guy where the line does not reflect his impact, but he would be massive. So let's monitor that situation. Again, everything I'm hearing from internal is that they want to take it slow with John Feliciano, but this is now like you're 7-5 here, right? Like, it's go time. And so the idea that we're just going to kind of like casually bring Feliciano back and we'll save him for the playoffs, like that's not a strategy here, right? Especially when you look at the schedule.
Yeah,
so let's see if he's back. It'd be a vital part to the offense.
At this point, you lose this week, you're 7-6. You lose next week on the road at Foxborough, you're 7-7. And to be honest, when you look at some of the playoff permutations that are out there, there's a chance that 10-7 won't be good enough to get you in the back half of the playoff picture by virtue of some of the tiebreakers. So you want to put the pressure on everybody else. This is a game you have to go out there and play at your absolute best against a truly elite side in the form of the Tampa Bay Bucks. But to your point, talking about Brian Daboll and company, I thought it was interesting all the back and forth between Sean McDermott and Brian Daboll that some of the beat writers had talked about, and the potential situation brewing there is these two guys need to make sure they're pulling in the same direction. That Daboll so much had to come out and say that I think we have a good understanding. We're week to week. We want to be a physical offense and control the line of scrimmage. We have conversations daily on the things we're doing. Let's see if Buffalo can put it all together on a short week on the road against a very good opponent in the form of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We do have one game left to go. That, of course, would be the Sunday night football game, which probably should be run inside of 2 minutes or less as far as the time we allocate to breaking it down. But before we get there, we'll welcome in our weekly guest. He joins us every Thursday here on the Bet the Board podcast. You, of course, can follow John on Twitter, Jay Sheeran. That's JSHEERAN1981. And John, I feel like we have to start this week off like we do every week, asking how the public performed last weekend, and did the house give a little bit back with some of those high-profile road favorites and double-digit chalks come to the window quite easily?
I think it was certainly better, Todd, for the public. We managed to eke out some small profit on Sunday. Monday Night Football was okay for us. Obviously, given the result of 14-10 meant not everybody in the world was on the under, and from an SGP perspective, probably enough to make us profitable. So all in all, not a bad weekend for us, despite, as you said, a lot of road favourites covering on Sunday. So a little bit better, though, than the massacre it's been recently, for sure. Still enough to get the wages paid.
You mentioned SGP on Monday night, and I was going to ask, you didn't have the exact opposite ring true with everybody coming to bet under across the board. How the general public doesn't see the weather and dawn on them the same way it does with a high-scoring affair to take all the marquee players and bet them over their numbers, huh?
Yeah, I think plenty of us in the office were sweating some over rushing and under receiving, that's for sure. But yeah, in general, I think the public like to bet overs. That's why there tends to be more value on the unders. And even in a situation where we saw the wind as badly affect the game as we did, it became pretty evident pretty quickly and pretty early in the game. When you have 7 minutes played and no one's attempted a pass, I think that was all the indication you needed as to what was going to happen in the rest of the game. So we saw some sharp play on the unders. I think that's a good edge case where the models are just wrong. They just can't handle the idea of the situation in the game and are still too tied to the pre-game total. I think for me, everything changed after 6 or 7 minutes of that game, and yeah, you had to sweat it a little bit when the total went to 46 with the short field and the second touchdown. But from there on in, the under was always good. So yeah, interesting case.
You definitely have to love the comments Bill Belichick made when asked about it after, how his game plan would change within 3 weeks when they had to play the Bills again. He said, well, we didn't show any of our passing plays, so we have all of that in our arsenal. Should be interesting to see where that side total open up in a few short weeks, knowing New England comes in off the bye, and of course Buffalo will have their hands full this weekend. John, when you look at some of the way the AFC is played out, and I know you guys have yes-nos on teams to make the playoffs and such, how challenging is it with some of the marquee teams as they struggle, and when you guys look to assess kind of strength of schedule difficulty, maybe particularly in the AFC North, for how you price out those teams like the Steelers, the Ravens, the Browns, and the Bengals from a future standpoint, and will they or won't they make the postseason?
Yeah, it's not difficult for us at all. I mean, we have really good models and simulations that we can run that mean that, at least as far as we're concerned, that the odds that are offered on the website are reflective of the probabilities that we give each of those teams winning the AFC. Sure, things change, and sure, your opinion and your feel will change about those teams as you go through, and you see Cincinnati and Joe Burrow not practicing this week with his pinky, and a bit of a blowout last week for them, and then the Ravens struggle as well and lose a game in Pittsburgh that I didn't see coming. But easily for us, just a rerun of the simulations with the updated information, and I spit it out, so I can't claim that one causes us too much concern.
Speaking of the Steelers, before I flip things over to Payne and let him ask some of the harder hitting questions here. When you look at a game like tonight, a very public team in the Pittsburgh Steelers, and as you mentioned, in the wake of a big upset win against the Baltimore Ravens. Meanwhile, the Minnesota Vikings dealing with a myriad of injuries, although it does appear Dalvin Cook is going to be active. What his workload looks like remains to be seen. It's a game we broke down a little bit earlier in the show, but kind of wanted to get your take on what the betting patterns look like for Thursday Night Football with Minnesota's playoff life, if they even have one, hanging in the balance, and the Steelers suddenly looking a little bit more formidable after what we saw Sunday.
Yeah, I think, like you said, there's plenty of public interest. It's the narrative from the last couple of weeks, right? The Pittsburgh Steelers come in off a really good win against the Ravens, and the Vikings have been pretty disappointing the last 2 weeks. Dalvin Cook now this morning, I think none of us probably expected him to play. He'll probably give the Viking bettors a bit more confidence and maybe even move the line more than he should. From a personal perspective, I think this is a good matchup for the Vikings. I've fallen for them the last 2 weeks, and they've not been delivering the goods, but I feel like their susceptibility defensively probably won't be taken advantage of by the Steelers. And sure, Najee will probably have a good day on the ground, but I think this is a good spot for Minnesota for me, and this is my last shot with them. We only made the number 2.72, so if it does go above 3, we will favour the Steelers on the book as a company. But my own personal opinion is I think this is X's and O's not a bad matchup for the Vikings, without having heard what you guys said earlier and probably disagreeing 100%.
No, I think you're pretty spot on there, John. Looks like some, not just Dalvin Cook returning, and as Todd alluded to, we don't quite know his workload, but defensively, Patrick Peterson up, Eric Kendricks up, Anthony Barr up, got both your interior defensive linemen back last week, so the defense is getting a little bit healthier for Zimmer. Transitioning to Sunday's games a little bit, I know we had a conversation off air, and it's always good to kind of bring those to the forefront for our listeners, and focusing on some of the games you've taken sharp action on. I know Atlanta +3 was one of those. What have you kind of seen there personally, and how was your, I guess, in-house debate on moving that game downwards and where you actually think that game should be placed?
Yeah, I think we were a little disappointed to lay that sharp money, like you said, at 3. We only made the game a 2-point game, so to be sitting on the field goal was probably a misstep on our behalf and one we would want back. Carolina, Atlanta hardly shooting the lights out either, but Carolina quarterback obviously looks a bit of a mess. We spoke about Cam Newton and what he brings to the locker room, the goal threat that he has running the football, but beyond that, it's a bit of a shambles. I think 5 for 21 last week illustrated that, and I don't have any confidence in either of those guys taking the field. So, at 3 with the field goal, I think that one made sense, and like I said, one we would probably want back. The other one I think was a similar situation was the Rams Payne, where we saw the same professional outfit come on at +3. Again, we only made 2. We don't have the conversation till a Wednesday, so they're the 2 that have moved probably most significantly off that field goal. 2 that we agree with, and 2 sides that I think are pretty interesting this week.
Appreciate you peeling back the curtain on those. It's always interesting. There's a couple other big games that we have seen movement on, and I know you might not have necessarily taken that action, but a house opinion or your own would be great. When we look at Bills Buccaneers, obviously the Bills have been just dragged through the mud all week based upon their performance Monday night against New England. We've seen the Buccaneers, most places open 3. We're now out to 3.5. Anything you're seeing there personally?
We made this under a field goal. We haven't seen any professional money. I think that probably comes down to some of the injury concerns, particularly on the OL for Tampa Bay. We'll favour this one quite heavily, I think, and take a decent opinion with the Bills. It feels like a good spot again. They've been a little bit disappointed in the last couple of weeks, and obviously a bit of a nightmare scenario for them on Monday night. But a short week obviously considered, and we respect the money that the market has favoured towards Tampa Bay, but I think this is one where we'll take a pretty aggressive spot towards the weekend. Makes
complete sense. And another game that is a battle for the division with Dallas and Washington in the NFC East. We saw that trickle down off the open, got as low as 3.5, and then yesterday Dallas did take some money. We're out to 4.5 now. Anything there?
Not really. It's almost exactly on our number at 4. So we didn't have a strong opinion, pretty much sticking on the market on that one. Feels a little bit maybe like the Minnesota game with Dallas. It doesn't look the worst matchup for me for them. And, we agree with the number. Don't have a strong opinion. Probably wouldn't play it. But if you put a gun to my head, I'd probably take the Cowboys.
Makes complete sense. And 2 more games I want to ask you before I kick it back to Todd. We've seen movement across the 0 on both of them, 49ers, Bengals, and then the divisional matchup between the Ravens and Browns.
We made it -1 on the 49ers, so agreed with the line move that we saw there. Obviously with Burrow playing a key part in that as well, missing practice during the week. Expect him to be a go, but obviously a small bit of a concern. So not a strong opinion there. Haven't seen a ton of action in that game either. The Ravens-Browns, we made the Browns 1.5. It's 2.5 right now. Again, not a strong opinion given that point there. Interested to see where it goes. I think the only other game we have a strong opinion in Payne would be the under in the Raiders-Chiefs game. We're staying pretty low on that total of 47.5. I think that's a half a point or a point underneath where the market generally is. We actually only made it 46.5, so still room for us to be aggressive. There's some concern around the wind. I think 17 to 20 mile an hour gusts or winds scheduled for kickoff. So that one is one that we're pretty interested in as well. We made it 7.5, so agree with the move in the market off an open, I think, which was 10, down to even 9. But like I said, we wouldn't be surprised to see it even go further towards the Raiders either.
It's so interesting when you look at the way these Chiefs totals have been and what we've seen from a defensive improvement standpoint. I know both of you guys touched on it last week when we chatted with you, John, about the number and where we thought it was going to go against the Denver Broncos. After the opening drive from Kansas City, you weren't quite sure that 47 and 46.5 was going to be enough. And then, of course, you get the march from the heavens for underbettors that took more than 11 minutes where Denver goes 20 plays and comes away with 0 points. Last thing for me, when you look at the Monday night game, last week, of course, we saw the Bills and Patriots. We knew how important that was in terms of determining the AFC pecking order. The weather marred a little bit of some of the fireworks I'm sure casual bettors want to see. We have another treat that you mentioned earlier, John, on Monday night with the Rams and Cardinals. We won't have a chance to talk to you day of. But how important is it for the book, John, when you guys have some of the marquee teams with gaudy records like we've seen each of the last couple of weeks on Primetime for that final game of the week to drive incremental betting handle versus some of the duds that we've seen earlier in the season?
Primetime is always important. It's about 50% of our NFL handle, which is a pretty big number when you think about all the games that are played. When we talk about our expected margin, they're the games that we really need to get right. If we get those right, then we'll have a decent performance on the week given the sheer amount of handle that goes through it. So I think the message is primetime games are always heavily bet. But when you get a good marquee matchup, as you said, obviously marred a little bit by the weather last week, as you allude to. But the Rams-Cardinal looks like a really good spot for Monday night bettors. And sure, the records are a little gaudy recently, but I think there's probably more injury impact on that than may even be obvious with the likes of Kyler. Obviously, we think Stafford's been hurt for a number of weeks as well. So I think getting a big matchup like that always drives incremental, particularly if they've had a decent weekend, the public that is, and managed to get their wallets pretty full with a view towards Monday night. It definitely brings out the additional spend, and I think this is a good week for that to happen, hopefully.
Payne, John won't say it, but I know what he's thinking. That 17-13 final for all the single-game parlay players between the Rams and Cardinals might be the ideal scenario to cap off NFL Week 14. We'll see if the weather gods inside the dome at University of Phoenix Stadium can help out and create some wintry and windy conditions for Kyler Murray and Matthew Stafford. John, can't thank you enough for your time with us this morning. I mean, your content clearly makes our listeners a lot smarter and adds a layer of complexity to the discussion that Payne and I have each and every week. So appreciate it, and best of luck this weekend, my friend.
Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it.
Payne, I feel like John did enough to handicap Monday Night Football between the Cardinals and Rams that we should give ourselves a bye week that the listeners have enough to go off of.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that was quick and easy.
So
I'll be at the beach Monday.
When was the last time you were actually at the beach? I know obviously not during football season, but even during the summer, you never struck me as a beach guy in all the time that we've been doing these things.
I don't do sand.
I don't do sand. So do you bring the
just gets everywhere? Do
you bring the sand to you? Or are you a pool guy? I mean, what exactly is the summer recreation then down there in South Florida?
There really isn't. It's doing some traveling and then preparing for football season. Basically, post March Madness to preparation for football season is about a 6-week layoff. That's it. So it's a lot of sleeping in, recovering, and then an occasional trip or two throughout that. But yeah, I'm not a big beach guy. If you can come up with something that's outdoors with water and a grill and there's no sand involved, awesome. Sand is like the death of me. Right? Try to be clean. You go to the beach and, 3 weeks later, you're still pulling sand out of your ass. I hate sand.
Oh, you're definitely I'm going to get myself a cabin in social isolation in the woods. I'm going to get myself a grill out there and figure out how to learn off the land once you get out of this gambling business.
Yeah, well, that's me, living off the land.
I figured. That's what people don't know. I mean, you're Mr. Granola over there. Go out there and hunt and forage for your own food, right? That's exactly how you live your life.
No, that is not how I live my life.
All right, Packers and Bears, one game. I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on this contest because we're not going to tell our listeners much of what they don't already know. The Green Bay Packers, an 11.5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total on the game, 43. This will be the 204th meeting between these two franchises, the NFL's oldest rivalry. The Packers are undefeated against the Bears under Coach LaFleur, 5-0 against the spread. And the numbers, Bears fans, cover your ears. 30-14 ATS under LaFleur for the Packers during the regular season. 4 of their 5 home wins this year have all been by double digits. 10 straight wins in primetime, going 9-1 against the spread during that span. But maybe there is a silver lining, Payne, and I found this to be one of the more interesting nuggets. Not sure it's applicable here, but still interesting to share. That the Packers are 0-2 straight up off the bye. They lost both games by 28-plus points under LaFleur's leadership. Now offer up a 4-game losing streak out of the bye, even before LaFleur was their head coach. But the Packers have outscored the Bears 361-195 the last 13 home games. And the Bears, ATS futility, nothing new to this franchise. 16-28 against the spread since the start of 2019 has them tied with the Jets for rock bottom. But the franchise quarterback will return in Justin Fields. Is he enough, Payne, to keep this game somewhat competitive? Or do we plan to turn in early on Sunday night with no need to watch the second half?
I think the interesting part of this is you did mention LaFleur's struggles out of the bye, and I think they're a thing, right? Like the byes now with the new CBA can be handled so differently. Like we're either just giving time to our guys to get the hell away and rest, or we're going to really try to implement things, and it just feels like the vibe for the Packers is we're going to rest our guys, take things lightly. Who knows? After the 2 games that you just mentioned, maybe the approach is a little bit different. I will say, when you look at this matchup a little bit, there was one unit we kind of picked on a little bit in our NFC preview series, and it was the Bears defense. And we didn't think the parts were as good as perception, right? Like Mack and Hicks and Quinn, they were all on the wrong side of 30. The corner situation looked bleak in terms of experience and depth. There was no clear-cut number 2 outside corner. It was basically Jalen Johnson, then massive question marks. Fortunately, Johnson and Roquan Smith, the 2 young guys, have played out of their minds this season, or things would be real ugly for the Bears defense. But what I'm seeing is this. The first 5 weeks, when the older guys on the Bears defense were healthy, and Sean Desai's like 4-1-6 big nickel defense with 3 safeties on the field at once was throwing offenses for a loop, Chicago was solid, 7th in defensive EPA per play. Now the injury bug has hit. Mack's out, Hicks is in and out of the lineup, Quinn is playing through an injury, depth guys in the front 7 have been in and out of the lineup, and offenses have film on what this quirky defense is now. Since that stretch, the Bears are 31st in EPA per play defense since week 6. Okay? And so I think Matt LaFleur, off the struggles, is going to change a little bit here. I would expect you have 2 weeks to devise a game plan against a defense that's injured and trending horrifically. And they've also seen once, which should help. I think Green Bay is going to move the ball. But for the Bears to keep this within the 13, and I can envision this line trending down, right? The line's a little higher. The Bears need to kind of remain stout in the red zone. That's been their saving grace. The Bears have played a top 5 schedule of offenses, but they're 11th in touchdown prevention when teams enter their red zone. So you got to hold Green Bay to 3 because they are going to move it up and down the field a little bit here. Offensively, it's tough to project the Bears' offense. Justin Fields is a go, making his first road start at Lambeau with broken ribs, and it's basically a pain tolerance handling type situation. This is where you need to lean on your ground game, right? It's got to be Montgomery. It's got to be Herbert. They have to have big days to cover. That's kind of the recipe and the clearest path here to success is be able to run successfully, chew clock, hold the Packers to 3 when they're on offense. Otherwise, this probably gets ugly. But there are some paths to covering here, right? Like Bill Lazor, he's been a much better play caller. The Bears are a very respectable 13th in EPA per rush since he's taken over this same stretch of Bill Lazor in charge. Whether the Bears are running from 11, 12, or 21 personnel, almost 51% of runs have grade successful. The Packers defense, 27th in defensive rush efficiency. When Chicago does throw, hit the frickin' tight end, right? The Packers are below average and efficiency and counting stats defending tight ends. Get Kmet involved. Use Graham situationally. There's not a ton of paths to victory here for Chicago. But like defensively, if they can take jabs and not allow Green Bay to knock them out, then offensively, be physical, get the ground game going, and then rely on your two-headed back system. And then when you do throw, hit the tight end. Relative success can be had. And if you're in that Chicago Bears locker room, have some fucking pride, okay? Aaron Rodgers went into Soldier Field, beat you, and then told the entire world he owned you. And then he doubled down this week. When
I was going to say, he didn't back down. He went, you know what? I'm going to go right on top and keep layering it on.
And if you're a Packers fan, maybe hit mute and turn away. But if I am Matt Nagy or Ryan Pace, I'm going to make it clear we are happy as an organization and eating a 15-yard penalty, and we will pay whatever fine transpires. Make sure Aaron Rodgers feels a hard tackle early in this game. And if you do that, and if you're able to get the ground game going, and if you're able to hold the 3, you're probably going to cover the 13. I do expect this to trend down. I think you will have professional bettors value hunt the Bears here because 13 is a little bit of a nutty number, and my guess is if this was played in a different time slot, you'd be looking at something like 10 here. And again, I know that the Bears are trending poorly, but there are some matchups here within the game that could allow them to be somewhat successful, right? This is still a rivalry game. This is still two hated division opponents. Laying 13 in that type of setting isn't necessarily, the best idea here. The core number on this game were more like the other side of double digits, as crazy as that sounds, and I don't really like the Bears. But that's just kind of the value I see in the number. I don't know if I'm going to get to the window with the Bears ticket. I don't. But ultimately, I think that'll be like the nibble side. I don't think anyone's going to like come in and hammer this game from a group perspective. Could be wrong. And, Primetime, you could get mud on your face, backing the ugly team here. But long term, it's difficult, laying 13 in a division game when the price should be, probably 3 points lower than where it is.
Some numbers on Rodgers against the Bears, and then I have a follow-up question that I want to ask you. When you look at Rodgers, 22-5 straight up against Chicago, 20-7 against the number, 57 touchdown passes to 12 picks. He has the best winning percentage by any quarterback versus the Bears all time, 32 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, and a passer rating of 110 in 13 career home starts. And you look at Rodgers' passer rating numbers the last 3 games against the Bears, 128, 132, 148. Are you surprised that the Bears are electing to bring back Justin Fields in a game of this magnitude, or do they feel at this point they have nothing to lose, pain threshold and tolerance notwithstanding that, hey, look, let's throw his feet to the fire against our most bitter rival under the bright lights of Lambeau Field, regardless of what the results will look like?
I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, I think if you are trying to save your job, you're bringing Justin Fields back out because if you strike lightning, that's what you can sell to the people that be making decisions. Hey, we went into Lambeau Field. We beat the Green Bay Packers. We did it with the future. We selected that future. That's our guy. We drafted him. We molded him. This is what things can look like. And that's the only way you're saving your job. You're not saving your job by trotting Andy Dalton out there and having him throw 4 interceptions and lose games. That's only going to make things worse. So the only hope that Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy have is Justin Fields looking like $1 million. That's the only saving grace they have. And so ultimately, I think that's why he's going to be out there.
God, I can see Ryan Pace somehow finding a way to save his job, but Matt Nagy being able to get himself off of the hot seat and back in the good graces for Bears fans, given what we've seen transpire over the last couple of years, would be one of the bigger underdog stories that we've seen in the National Football League, albeit I'm not sure which direction the Bears want to go in. And of course, all sorts of interesting storylines starting to brew there that the Bears would get a competitive advantage if they fired Nagy before the end of the season, allowing them to talk to some other prospective head coaching candidates, something the franchise has never done in their illustrious history, firing a coach in the middle of the year. So catch-22 there. Should the Bears go out there and underachieve on Sunday night in a game where all of football will be watching? But every year, Payne, it seems that we get the Bears and Packers under the bright lights at Lambeau. Usually it's much better when it's early in the season before we know there's a huge disparity between the two teams. But here we are. I'm sure there's all sorts of TV scheduling technicalities that kept us from getting Bills and Bucs Sunday night instead of Bears-Packers. So either way, a good Sunday of football. Couldn't cover all the games in a great detail as we would have liked, but that's just the nature of the beast. We do have one final order of business to figure out around these parts, but before we do that, I want to encourage all of you, our loyal listeners, to follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at BetTheBoardPod. Also, FanDuel.com. Use the promo code BetTheBoard. $1,000 risk-free bets, 30-1 enhanced odds. Everything that you'd want as a sports bettor as a new user sign up. FanDuel's got you covered, especially for our Bet the Board listeners. But Payne, we had a good weekend in the National Football League last Sunday. We also were able to cash on Saturday with a college football team total. When you look at the betting board this weekend for Week 14, where do you see an investable opportunity for everyone?
Let's go with Atlanta and Carolina, first half under 21. I would guess that this is going to be on the move pretty quickly. So if you are listening Sunday, you're probably going to miss out on 21. To me, this is an interesting situation. Obviously, you have division foes playing each other for the second time. When they don't happen in close proximity, usually you see them trend a little bit towards the under. We have seen some full game movement under from 43.5 down to 42.5. I like the first half a little bit better. What we have seen this week unfold is Matt Rule come out and fire Joe Brady. Bad move, but everything we have heard from Matt Rule is he wants to run the ball more. Said it 6, 7, 8 weeks ago. So in firing Joe Brady, who does he hire? The running backs coach. He promotes the running backs coach to offensive coordinator, Jeff Nixon. And so right off the bat, you know what this game plan is likely to be for Carolina. And it's going to be a ground and pound attack. On the other side of the ball, you have a Falcons offense that isn't overly explosive at all. And the one area where Carolina's defense can feast is getting pressure on the quarterback. And so I see both defenses having clear advantages here in my mind. So we're going to have a slowed down game. We have advantages defensively as well. Pace is middling for both in the first half, so neither team is overly fast here. And so I think there's a lot of things to like about this first half under. So that's where we're heading. We will keep the streak alive. First half under 21.
Hey, that's what this podcast was built on. First half unders, and there's no reason to abandon our favorite bet type, especially when there's some opportunities to be found on the betting board. Any final words of wisdom, life advice you'd like to share other than discouraging our listeners who may be talking to their significant others, trying to figure out a getaway once the season's over, discouraging them from going anywhere where there may or may not be sand?
No. If you like sand, frolic away. Bury those toes.
You know, it's funny because as a kid, we always went down to visit my grandma who lived in your neck of the woods in South Florida. But my dad had one of the more unique systems when it came. The guy loved the beach, but hated sand. So kind of the same way as you, albeit loved the beach. So he'd come down with like 13, he'd come down there with like 13 towels and try and create an entire pattern. So he didn't actually have to get on sand because this was a dude who threw on the Hawaiian tropics, smelled like a giant coconut. And I knew full well as a little kid that if I ever wanted to piss him off, I could take a small handful of sand and flip it on him, and he'd try and chase after me like a monster from the deep lagoon.
I feel like your dad's my spirit animal here. We're on the same vibe, the same wavelength here.
Yeah,
we're also quite quite feisty.
Yeah, it might be scary for me. You get out of one man's house and I enter another man's who I decide to work with and build a podcast brand here. It may be a direct indictment of my judgment, but that's a different discussion for a different day, ladies and gentlemen. We're not on the therapy.
That's a strategy right there.
Yeah,
just
I'm
break
not
out 12 towels.
Well, I mean, it's one.
I'm sure you're on the beach and then you gravitate right over, have a nice little cocktail. It's perfect.
You know, it's one way to do it, but you have to come down with like 13 backpacks and everything else to try and carry those kind of towels. So it'd be different if you had all sorts of folks at a resort that were able to lay it all out there for you. But I used to tell him all the time that I felt like slave labor having to try and be involved. And that's what he always would tell me. He said, why would I ever shovel snow on my driveway myself? That's what I have kids for. So
Perfect strategy.
Equal opportunity for both my sister and I. But I digress. Best of luck to all of you, our loyal listeners, with all of your NFL Week 14 investments. And with the first half under ticket on the Carolina Panthers against the Atlanta Falcons come Sunday afternoon. Hopefully we'll see you at the window.